Hello everybody, this is Trace Perot. This is my channel 20 at 70. Today is the 31st of March. And this is video number 13, entitled, what am I going to call this? I'm going to call this Organic versus Conventional. Does it matter? Okay, so this is continuation of what I'm now calling my working man series on being a raw vegan. And the reason I'm doing that is because most of the videos out there about being a raw vegan, about being a low-fat raw vegan, about being 80-10-10, are being done by people who are involved in the industry as money-making promoters, health coaches, fasting coaches, and etc., food vendors, right? Well, I don't have any of those interests. I'm just a regular working slob, and so hopefully that'll give you a unique perspective, and I think it adds a layer of validity because I'm not somebody who's making money off of this. I'm sharing my experience, and I'm not, most of my time is not taken up by coaching people to be raw or supervising fasting or anything else. Like, I have all kinds of other interests going on, and so that's that. So I call this channel 20 at 70 because basically I feel like I'm 20 at 70. I have more stamina, my health's better, my energy level is way better than when I was at 20. I don't get sick. If you saw the last video, you saw quite a little dissertation on that bit. So, I've had my experience. Everybody knows I've been raw vegan for 30 years. I was a vegetarian for a couple of years before that. Then I made the transition. First 15 years was a high-fat raw vegan. I had not encountered Doug Graham and the 80-10-10 and philosophy up until that point, and there wasn't that much information out there, so you kind of made do. I went with the flow. Raw food was just coming into its own as I became a vegetarian. In around the early 90s. So I had to work with what there was. I had to experiment and try to find out, what was going to work for me. How am I gonna start this? Okay, so I want to start this with a Shakespearean quote. It's from a play called Much Ado About Nothing, and it's kind of revealing, especially if you come to a vegetarian or a vegan or a raw vegan lifestyle later in your life. And that quote is, man loves the meat of his youth that he cannot endure in his age. So nothing could be truer than that. I mean, you can't eat a standard American diet your entire life without going steadily downhill and feeling the effects of that. And so you have to change. You can't eat at 50 what you ate at 20. It just doesn't work. Unless you want to have to deal with a lot of health problems and low energy and all the other stuff, the aging process and all that kind of stuff. I don't have any corrections from the last video because it's been at least 10 days since I did that, and I didn't watch the video again. So I don't exactly remember what I said. So if there are any corrections, I'll throw them on the next video. So I will move on to what I learned about food, which I do every time I do a video. So what I learned about food this week was what I learned about water. And I guess water can be considered food. Fact is that the way you eat on a low-fat, raw vegan diet, most of your food is somewhere between, we're talking 65, 70% and 85 to 90% water, okay? So the human body is made up of an average of 60% water. Different parts of your body have different water densities, if you will. And but 60% is about the average, So, there's something that makes total sense. If you're eating food that's very high in water content, like let's take a look. Bananas. Bananas are 75% water? Yeah, a banana is 75% water. An apple is 86% water. A zucchini, believe it or not, that lovely, satisfying fruit that you can spiralize and make into raw spaghetti, is 90% water, okay? So I often make the joke when people ask me, what I eat. Well, I eat a lot of expensive water is what I eat. So, because I eat 100% organic, right? So, the general perception is organic food is more expensive than conventional, and that's pretty accurate. So I eat, my diet consists of a lot of expensive water. So what are we going to say about water? Interestingly enough, I saw a chart that somebody posted on social media about what water's really all about. Okay, so apparently there's 4 phases of water. And the water that your body can use is something called H3O2, okay? And this is converted from H2O by plants into this H3O2. This H3O2 is kind of like it's somewhere between a solid and a liquid. It's like a gel, all right? Apparently, it's the only water that your body can actually use in its processes and its nourishment. It has to convert H2O to this other, chemical manifestation of water in order for it to benefit you. So, in order for you to absorb it, it has to be converted to this what they call the 4th phase of water, right? So this, of course, has to do with the cellular level, okay? Nutrition and hydration at the cellular level. And so I thought that was really interesting. Because, there's this fanaticism about drinking water, right? Okay, you go to this, you see people walking out of the supermarket with, 50 plastic containers of mineral water from who knows where, And I have heard before in passing conversation that drinking water actually is not really that good for you. But it certainly is all the rage, I think, primarily because of the promotion, but also because if you're overweight and you're not feeling good, your diet's not working for you, you're doing standard American diet, if I drink water, I can lose weight. I can feel better. Water's good for you, and it's easy. So you go to the store, you buy all this water in plastic containers. Little do you know that when you take it out to the car, on the way out to the car, if the sun is shining and it shines through that plastic into the water, it immediately gases off chemicals into the water. If you let your plastic water containers sit out in the sun, because you're on a picnic at the park, right? That water is being completely contaminated by the sun shining through the plastic, because plastic is a volatile substance. It's not stable. Some kinds of plastic are different than others, less stable than others. As far as my firsthand experience with this, without a doubt, I noticed very early on, and I can back that up with my 30 years experience, because 30 years is a long time, and you notice things, you keep track of things, and they repeat, okay? So what I noticed right off the bat was, initially, I had episodes where I couldn't speak well. I was like choking and I couldn't speak, and this would go on for like an hour and stuff. And Sure enough, pretty soon I associated it with drinking water out of plastic that had been exposed to the sun. And so ever since I realized that, went to great efforts, because I get water out of the water machine at the health food store, to keep the sun off the water, okay? When I made mistakes and the sun managed to penetrate for the briefest amount of time, 30 seconds to a minute, or if I put it in my car and the sun shined through the window and on the way home or something, sure enough, I'd drink that water and my voice would like disappear, okay? So that was proof enough for me. You know, you might say I'm sensitive, but that's the way it is. I want to be sensitive. I want to know these things because I don't want these toxins in my body. So anyways, enough said about water. I think that's very interesting. And, oh, there's one more thing I want to add. It's kind of funny, you know. Apparently, 75% of the population in the United States is chronically dehydrated, okay? So the indicators that point to that being pretty darn accurate are just looking at what people eat. You know, people are consuming tremendous amounts of salt. Salt is very dehydrating. They're eating a lot of cooked food. Cooked food is dehydrating. They're eating, you know, most of their diets, you know, are cooked food devoid of these natural water-containing fruits and vegetables that a raw vegan would eat. And so as a consequence, 75% of all citizens of the United States are chronically dehydrated. I'm sure that leads to all kinds of problems. Who knows, you know, what health effects comes from long-term dehydration. And on that note, I want to just tell you a little story. You know, I have to get COVID tested every week for my work, and so I go over, and it's a saliva test, right? So I go into this big pavilion, and there's all these white coats in there, and you know, they're testing saliva, right? So they give you a little vial, and you spit into it. Well, you know, the first thing I noticed when I started doing this was I would grab the vial, I would sit down in the chair, and I would be in the chair no longer than a minute, right, spitting into the vial, and the vial was full, and I'd get up, and I'd take it over, and they'd, you know, cap it off and make a record, and then I'd leave. So I soon begin to notice that when I arrive, there's all these people sitting on these chairs, right, and they're all, you know, spitting into the vial, right, you know, and they've obviously been there for a while, right? So I go in, I get the vial, I get it done in a minute, I get up and I leave, and I notice that those people are still there, okay? So what do you think? You think those are some of the 75% of the U.S. population that is chronically dehydrated, so dehydrated that they can't get enough saliva into their mouth to fill up a tiny little vial without having to sit there for who knows how long, you know, 15, 20 minutes. So it's kind of an interesting illustration. The next thing I want to do is, you know, I've been doing this diet squeeze, right? Well, I'm going to do a little capsulization of that. I heard something on a video and an interview with Dr. Doug Graham, and the guy kind of introduced Graham and asked him or suggested that, well, you know, for a low-fat raw vegan, 80-10-10er, basically there's this little routine. I mean, it involves acid fruit, sweet fruit and greens, subacid fruit, a big salad with greens and various vegetables, and then maybe some more subacid or acid fruit. And that's it. That's the routine. I mean, that's basically, you know, the hat rack that you hang your hat on if you're a vegan. I mean, it's pretty basic, pretty simple, nothing complicated, easy to do, fast, you know. So I was sitting down on a Leahy Drive in Kona, right? And I'm sort of approaching these clubs to get dates for the bands that I'm in. And I'm kind of gauging who's playing at these clubs and what they're playing and how big the crowds are and what ages the crowds are and things like this, you know. So sometimes I go in the clubs sometimes I'm riding, I'm on my bike, so I just ride, I sit out by the ocean, and I can hear them, right across the street, because they're open air clubs and they're upstairs, most of them. And so the other night I went by this place called Gertrude's Jazz Bar, and they have all different types of music, but it's primarily jazz. But they had a band there that was a Latin band, like a salsa band, full-on horn section, the whole ball of wax. I don't know, there's probably 6-7 people in the band playing all this Latin stuff, singing in Spanish and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, it sounded incredible. It just sounded so rich and so creative and everything. And so I thought, how do they do that? How are they doing that? Being a musician, I hear somebody play. If it impresses me, I can ask myself a question, how are they pulling that off? What's the structure of the music? How do they remember what to do when they do it? So the first thing I started to notice was the bass. Okay, bass usually carries a longer distance than any other instrument because of the size of the sound wave. It's got a greater amplitude, so you can hear a bass way down the street if a band is playing live, and then if you go up to where they're playing and you're right in front of them, the bass sounds at the same volume as the rest of the instruments, right? So anyways, first thing I noticed was the bass, so I started following the bass line. And what I found out was these what seemed to be incredibly complicated songs, highly arranged, with breaks and horn sections and drum solos and all this stuff. All this was going on based on a bass line of about 4 notes that was repetitive. That might repeat for like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes. Okay, same bass line. So the first thing I thought about that was, that's exactly like this diet. Okay, you've got a baseline involving different types of fruit and vegetables, right? Kind of in an organized fashion throughout the day. And that's kind of your baseline. That's your 4 or 5 notes that you repeat every day, right? But all the beauty and creativity and complexity is put on top of that baseline. So if you fix a fancy meal, if you get an exotic fruit and combine it with something, if you do all these things, these are all the creative aspects of, enhancing and just enhancing the whole, basic pattern that you have. So I thought that was a good analogy, because people will be turned off. They go, oh, so you eat the same thing every day, and, I couldn't eat fruit all day long, and, they have all these things, which is perfectly understandable, because it's a radically different way that most people have been brought up on or considered to be healthy. And and so, using this kind of analogy as an explanation, I mean, it's kind of illuminating. You can always hang out on that baseline, that simple fruit, vegetable baseline organization throughout the day. But if you want to jazz it up, you just lay all these horn sections, if you will, drum solos and everything else over the top, and it can make it into something easily as complex and varied and delicious as any cooked food on the planet, really. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So the main subject of this topic, okay. I wanted to just add something. I wanted to add a little bit of my story, because, being a working man, not being involved in the health field and all that per se, I'd like to add little slices of my life. So this week I had quite an experience. Because of schedule screw-ups and traveling and this sort of thing, and errors in my perception of where I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to do, I wound up actually going 4 days on approximately 9 hours of sleep. This was completely unintentional. And I would have avoided it at all costs, but I just, I couldn't avoid it. I had commitments, and I had schedule changes, and I had traveling I had to do, obligations. And man, I paid for it. Okay. I don't recommend going that long without sleep. I mean, as far as sleep goes, I need at least 6 hours a night. Recently taking classes at the university, sometimes I would cut out the 3, but then I would catch up, I would get up and do a paper or something in the middle of the night, and then I would go back to sleep for another 3 hours, right? That seemed to not really faze me, but not only getting 9 hours of sleep in 4 days just knocked me on my butt. I'm telling you. It took me about 2 days to recover. I actually felt kind of like I was ill, and so I'm just totally going to avoid that at all costs, and make sure that I get at least 6 hours of sleep. Sometimes I have to get by on 3, but I can make it up, but I really think that's a bad thing to do. Over the long term, I think that would really probably destroy your health. I remember when 80-10-10 first came out, Doug Graham was advocating that we should really get 10 hours of sleep a night. Well, he's backed off of that. I'm not sure why, but I didn't really buy that when it came out. A couple times I tried getting 10 hours of sleep, and it just made me tired. So the sleep thing is very important. I pretty much feel like I'm fully recovered now, and by all means, I'm going to avoid that this coming weekend. I just happen to have some back-to-back shifts and blah, 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 travel and obligations and stuff like that. But I learned my lesson, and hopefully I won't repeat that again. So on to organic versus conventional. Okay, now this video was inspired by my just happening to pick up and watch a video by Ronnie Smith of the UK Fruit Fest. I've mentioned him a couple times. He interviews people, and he's also the organizer of the Fruit Fest. Well, he put out this video that was, to my sensibility, pretty outrageous and practically irresponsible. And the thrust of the video was that it makes no difference whether you eat organic or conventional food, right? And he goes on to claim that the soil is not depleted, so there's no reason to eat organic food that's been, composted and mulched with natural organic compost and all this kind of stuff, because making it richer and stuff like that. So he claims that there's no basis for that. That idea that the soil is being depleted. He even goes so far as to say that the whole organic thing is like a conspiracy. It's a bunch of conspiring people that, it's like a conspiracy theory that organic is somehow more nutritional and more healthful and all this kind of stuff. And of course, I was shocked. And I'll say up front that there's two things that I attribute this opinion of his. And the first thing is that he's only got about 5 years experience with this whole fruitarian diet thing, right? As far as I know, 5-6 years, that's about it, right? You can't tell a whole lot in 5 years about that sort of thing. The second thing is that being the organizer of the UK Fruit Fest, if he was to adopt, for instance, Doug Graham's attitude that you should eat everything organic, it would probably cost another 20 to 30% to put on that fruit fest, right? And people would be demanding that it be organic, right? So he's taking the opposing position, because it plays out as making it a whole lot easier and more feasible to put on the UK Fruit Fest. So, I think this is a little irresponsible. I don't think he's really looked into this. And so the rest of this video, I'm just going to explore this topic. There are basically three things we're talking about. the health effects of organic versus conventional food, the nutritional value of organic versus conventional, and the crop yield of organic versus conventional. And a fourth one would be actually the user friendliness to farmers, especially and to the land itself, of organic versus conventional. So I will start with the health aspect. Okay, I may skip around a little bit if you can bear with me. After 30 years of being, actually 30 plus years of being 100% organic, eating 100% organic, except when I made a mistake or was ill-informed about a particular food that I was eating. Other than that, I've been 100% organic, and that has been my total conviction from the very beginning. Part of that was seeded in the 60s, when I was in high school and I was starting to become somewhat health conscious. Organic was the rebellion against the corporate food system and all this kind of thing, so it was very appealing. So that was partly seeded in the 60s, and by the time I became a vegetarian in the 90s, I was very conscious of that. So in terms of my personal experience, okay, this is not based on studies by researchers or doctors or anything else. This is based on me keeping track of what happens when I happen to eat something that is inorganic, okay, over 30 years, okay. So the effects that I have felt, okay, so let's start with headaches. I noticed very early on, way back in the 90s, that whenever I ate, because when I first started doing mostly fruit and I was a vegetarian, I didn't have any idea what kind of fruit I should be eating, so I would eat like 6, 7, 8 oranges, and think that was my fruit allotment for the day, right? So I didn't have any notion of what a high-density sweet fruit was or anything about it. I didn't know about calories. I was, quote, and I'm coining this phrase right now, I was very food dumb, okay? I didn't know what was going on, right? So first thing I noticed was that I would get pretty severe headaches after eating conventionally grown oranges. And then I switched over to organic oranges. And then every time I went back to a conventional orange, I would get a headache, right? So this happened, who knows how many times, 3 or 4 times. And I that was it. I would not touch, to this day, a conventionally grown orange, all right? So obviously something in there that they're spraying on it or they're fertilizing with is causing, as a chemical, it's causing some kind of health effect that has to do with headaches. On top of the headache problem, I've had migraine headaches directly related to, especially in the case of conventional nuts, okay? And nuts are a very easy thing to make a mistake about, especially if you shop in a health food store and the nuts are in bins, because a lot of times they'll have a conventional almond bin right next to an organic almond bin, right? And if you're like in a hurry and you're not really paying attention to what you're doing and, this kind of thing, more than once I grabbed my nuts out of the wrong bin. And every single time I have done that, I have gotten a severe migraine headache. But of course, I get the aura, which if you don't know about migraine headaches, before you get a headache, before the headache comes on, you get an aura, which is what happens is your vision crystallizes and it's very hard to see, and it's like you're looking through one of those whatever they are, periscope things, with the colors and all that stuff. So I would always get a migraine, I would always get this aura. But since I know about yoga and I've been studying yoga and practicing for 30 years, I knew that I could get rid of it by doing a handstand or a headstand for at least 10 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes, to open up the capillaries of my brain, increase the circulation, and flush out whatever was causing the constriction because migraine headaches are caused by the constriction of the capillaries in your brain. Okay? So the next thing would be stomach aches. Okay, and I specifically identified stomach aches that I was getting from eating conventional avocados. Sometimes I wasn't able, in California, I wasn't able to get an organic avocado on the spur of the moment, and I needed one to make, dressing. So I go, oh, okay, I'll eat a conventional avocado this time around. And invariably, I would get a stomach ache after doing that, after eating that avocado. So I found a direct relationship between conventional avocados and stomach aches. The next and last effect that I know of that was obvious was acne, okay? And I've noticed this over a spectrum of consuming different things that were grown conventionally, okay? I would get pimples, okay? I would go without pimples for years, right? And all of a sudden I'd start getting pimples, and I go, what's this all about, right? Now you hear about people's skin completely clearing up on this particular food regime, and it happens all the time. But, it may be because of the quality of the food you're eating, the hydration, but it also has to do with the presence of chemicals, okay? So I found a direct relationship between acne, getting pimples on your face, and eating conventionally grown food. So, and to my mind, it's unmistakable. And I remember, when I go into a health food store, I remember a couple of times there was a girl in Santa Barbara, there was one in New Jersey when I was over on Long Beach Island in New Jersey. Go to a health food store, and these young women had really terrible acne, right? And for some reason they were working in health food stores. I don't know if they had an inclination or an inkling of the fact that maybe it was something they were eating. But I really felt like just saying, look, the reason why you've got acne is because you're eating conventional food. You're eating food that has a lot of chemicals in it, and your body is reacting to it. And I'm pretty darn convinced that these severe cases of acne that you see people have may be somewhat related to them eating conventional diets, but definitely related to the chemicals in food. Okay, so let's take a look at that. First of all, I want to say, if you Google up and you say what pesticides are allowed on organically grown food, okay, here's what it comes up to say. First one, neem oil. It comes from the neem tree. Okay, that's allowed. I don't think neem oil, I use it to brush my teeth with, sometimes a neem-based toothpaste. I don't think neem oil is anything that's going to cause you any problems. Something called pyrethrin, which is made from chrysanthemums. Okay, I don't think that's going to hurt you. Okay. As far as synthetic things that can be put on organic food, it lists copper sulfate, which I don't know what copper sulfate is, alcohols, which, I don't drink. I consider alcohol to be a poison, but in that minute quantities, I don't think alcohol is going to be a problem either. Chlorine products. Now, that's something that's borderline, right? Chlorine is not, I don't know if there's an organic chlorine that you actually use as a nutritional element from plants or whatever. But my impression of chlorine is very, very bad, and I'll just give you one example. Once again, when I was having health problems and I got into modifying my diet, I noticed after I took a shower in tap water that my energy level just dropped tremendously, right? And pretty soon I started to associate it with those showers, those hot showers where there was a lot of vaporization of the water, steam and whatnot. And sure enough, so I went and I started using shower filters that would filter out the chlorine out of the water, and I wouldn't get that drop in energy or that, malaise feeling after taking a shower. And keep in mind that chlorine gas, and that basically is what you're doing. You're heating this water up. It's coming out as steam, and it's turning into a chlorine gas. Okay, chlorine gas is what the Nazis used in concentration camps to kill people. Okay, so you're getting chlorine gas in your shower, albeit at much significantly lower levels. But nonetheless, you're getting it day after day after day, your entire life, okay, if you're taking showers in tap water, hot showers in tap water. So this is something that I would, if that's what's going on with you, I would definitely recommend getting a very good, efficient shower filter to avoid being exposed to that chlorine. Anyway, so yeah, chlorine products. I would have to investigate this a little further. I'm not sure what they mean by chlorine products. Hydrogen peroxide can be put on or used in organic farming. Hydrogen peroxide, I've got some right here. I use it to disinfect cuts and things like that. So it's not really classified as something that's caustic or a poison or whatnot. Maybe they use it to kill certain bacterias or something. I really don't know, but that needs to be investigated further. And the last thing was soap. So they use certain kinds of soap. So I imagine if they're only allowed to use these things in organic produce, organic farming, that the soap that they're allowed to use is probably biodegradable, especially if I think they're under requirements for these things to be biodegradable on a farm to preserve the soil. That's part of being certified as an organic farm. But an interesting little story about that is that I buy this kind of soap that's all natural from the natural food store, and my involuntary pet rat that comes around every now and then chews its way through the screen. So I come home one night and half the bar of soap is gone. And it's laying on the floor, right? So the rat had been in there and it was eating the soap, which is actually a good sign for me, because if it's edible by a rat, it can't be that bad, right? So the other day I go out to the shower where I'd left another bar of soap, and the soap's gone. So the rat had just taken the whole bar of soap. It's kind of funny. So, there are soaps out there that are not that harmful. So that's what we get on organic produce. I don't know how much of that stuff or exactly which produce we get it from, but I will say this: I've never had any health problems from organic produce. I've never had any ever had any symptoms from eating organic produce, as opposed to conventional produce, in which I definitely have had several different types of symptoms. Conventional produce, over 200 chemicals are used in conventional farming. 200. And another little side story about this is I did a sales gig in, of all places, Bakersfield, California, right? The Bakersfield sound. I actually went to Country and Western Club while I was there, because I appreciate Country and Western, and I forget who it was. One of the big country stars has a club there. But anyways, I was there for about a month, and it was common vernacular among the local Bakersfieldians that they referred to the air of Bakersfield as the kiss of death. And obviously, if you're not familiar with California, Bakersfield is right in the middle of the Central Valley. It's one of the largest producing agricultural areas in the entire world. And, all day long, they're spraying from planes on the produce, right? And, of course, the air is full of that stuff. And I will say right now that if you go to Bakersfield, the people in Bakersfield are probably the most unhealthy looking people on the planet. I was there for a month and I had a lot of contact with them. That was just a little sideline. Now, one of the last things I want to get into about this convention, well, not the last thing, but, you know, we're getting there, is this whole thing about Roundup. I'm sure you've all heard of Roundup. The active ingredient is called glyphosate, I think. Glyphosate. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. It's been implicated in all kinds of cancer-causing issues and stuff like this. So I was very shocked to find out, you know, the FDA goes around and it tests these chemicals, and there have been studies done by the FDA on how these chemicals affect people's health, right? And that's the way they either ban a chemical or they don't. You know, who knows what the studies are, you know? I mean, all those chemicals to me are toxic. But this is one of the gauges they use to, quote unquote, determine whether things are healthy. Of course, we all know the FDA is, like most government agencies, is completely infiltrated by lobbyists, and it's just serving the ruling elite and the corporations to make sure that their products get used and they make tons of money and they have control over the food supply. So I was shocked to learn that glyphosate is not even tested for. They don't test food for glyphosate, right? This is probably, Roundup is probably the most widely used pesticide in the world. It's used everywhere. It was part of the Green Revolution campaign put on by corporate America, primarily DuPont. And what's that other big company? I forget the name of it. Anyways, they went into all these countries all over the world, and they basically pushed farmers, lured them into using their GMO products where they have to treat with Roundup, you know. And especially in India, they just devastated the farming industry in India. So, you know, why is not the FDA looking at glyphosate and Roundup as something detrimental to people's health? Well, it just goes to show you cannot trust government agencies. And if you grew up in the 60s like me, you learned that in a big way, all right? I never believe what the government tells me. I never believe what politicians say, okay? All right? I question everything that comes out of government. And this is just a classic example of how the way government behaves when it comes to money and corporate power. So the one thing I want to add to that also, this whole idea of organic food versus conventional, is that, like I said before in a previous video, when I was early into this, I read I adopted this belief fully, so it must have been a very reliable source, that the most minuscule amount of a substance, depending on what the substance is, can have a tremendous effect on the human body, right? And we're talking parts per million, maybe parts per billion, okay? So, you know, if you're like me and you eat 100% organic, you're going to be extremely sensitive to this. You're going to feel the effects, okay? If you're an SAD person, if you're overweight, if you're not paying attention, you're probably not, you know, being overweight and being numbed down by all this cooked food and meat products and everything, you're probably not going to feel these effects. But there's things going on, okay? You're accumulating these chemicals in your fatty tissues, and like I said before, you know, the epidemic of breast cancer has got to be directly related to pesticides and soil enhancers and all that stuff, because that stuff collects in your fatty tissue, okay? And obviously, these chemicals have a mutagenic effect on your cells, okay? So, and the last thing, which I think is probably the most significant of everything that I said about conventional versus organic, is that I listen to many different presenters on YouTube and also on the internet as to the question of whether or not conventional versus organic is an issue, whether or not we should be eating organic, whether it matters, whether it's a trend for people to make more money off the same kind of produce. Oh, and I will mention that they have had cases of fraud from, especially from other countries that are labeling things as organic and coming into the U.S. and being sold as organic as a premium, and they were not. Okay, just so you know. But anyways, so all these presenters are talking about this, right? They're saying, oh, well, there might be some little effect, or, blah, 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 conventional, organic over conventional. And then they start quoting things, percentages, Oh, yeah, well, we found a 0.75% increase in certain ailments because, from a control group that ate conventional food as opposed to the experimental group that ate organic food, right? And then they start talking about residues on produce. And not a single one of these presenters realizes or mentions the fact that the residue is only part of the picture, okay? The chemicals that they use, the chemicals that they spray on the produce, where do they wind up? They drip down into the soil. The soil amendments and the soil enhancers and the insecticides and whatnot that they put in the soil are already in the soil. So you add that to the sprayed on pesticides, and what's going on with your soil? Okay, so your soil's got all this muck in it, all this toxic garbage, and the plant is feeding off that soil, okay? So the plant is basically building itself and building its fiber from this toxic soil, okay? So that the toxins, okay, the pesticide residue is in the fiber of the plant, okay? You're not going to find it on the leaves, right? Well, you'll find it, but, it's going to be minor compared to this stuff lodging or settling into the fiber of the plant, okay? And when I first started becoming a vegetarian, I was juicing a lot, and it was pretty much a done deal that you didn't have to buy organic produce if you were just going to juice it, because you were taking the fiber out of the juice, right? And the pesticides were in the fiber of the juice, right? So you're taking them out and you're getting just the juice, or you're not getting the pesticides. So once again, I really think this is a lack of experience, a lack of knowledge that all these people harping out there about the minuscule effects of organic food over conventional food, the fact that it's not worth the premium, it just comes from ignorance. They don't realize, nobody has told them, nobody's talking about it, that the pesticides wind up in the fiber. Okay, so you're not going to find a whole lot of it on the leaf, right? On the outside of the leaf. It's like ridiculous. Science, once again, failing us. And I do have to say the thing about science is that in our society, in a ruling elite, scientists are really what you would regard as the aristocracy, okay? The aristocracy's primary function is to support the ruling elite. Okay, so science, as the aristocracy, 9 times out of 10, is just going to support what the ruling elite wants, is after, right, or is holding up, in terms of social structure and convention and whatnot. So, you have to question science. And a couple more things I want to add about that. The last part of this thing was nutritional value and yield. So what I know about that, what I learned about that early on was Well, the first item was that it was let out to me through information I got through research and stuff that fruits and vegetables in their natural state have anti-cancer elements that prevent you from getting cancer. Okay, and then the counter to that was that the pesticides that they were using, and probably still are, I'm sure, would negate that natural effect, that natural ability that fruits and vegetables had to combat cancer. Okay, I'm totally convinced that this is the case. So that was one aspect I definitely wanted to bring up, because cancer, like I said, that fruits and vegetables are naturally anti-cancerous. They're anti-carcinogenic, right? When you start messing with them, and you start feeding the plants toxins, all right, it's negating that ability for them to perform that function, right? So that was a very important point. There's a couple other things. The whole idea of soil depletion. Well, let's take a look at the most glaring example, okay? There's a guy by the name of Zach Bush. He's a vegan, right? He's a doctor. He's got 3 doctor specialties, which is kind of unheard of in the medical establishment. He's not a raw foodist. He doesn't know about fruit, really. He's appeared quite a bit on the Rich Roll podcast. And he's heavily involved in assisting farmers, primarily in the Midwest, to reclaim their land from chemical agriculture, right? And he's made the statement that it takes basically 3 years for the soil to completely die from GMO Roundup ready crops, okay? So, they use these GMO seeds that are resistant to Roundup sprayed on the crops. It kills everything, including all of the bacteria in the soil, okay? And it takes 3 years of this to completely kill the soil, all right? Interesting. Okay, so that leads to another thing, and that is this. The way plants absorb minerals, they break them down to absorb them into their, structures with bacteria. Bacteria do the job. Bacteria take the inorganic minerals and break them down into organic minerals so the plants can absorb them, and then we eat the plants and we get the minerals. We get the organic minerals. Okay. So if you kill everything in the soil, including the bacteria, the plant has no mechanism left for absorbing minerals, all right? Tell me there's something more significant to that when it comes to the Roundup issue, okay? The plants can't absorb minerals under a glyphosate, Roundup, GMO, Roundup ready crop situation, right? So anyways, all these farmers are biting the dust because they were promised a higher yield, which may have happened the first year, but then it went steadily down, right? They go bankrupt. Their land has to be sold off. And this brings up this whole thing with this woman in India whose name is Vandana Shiva, okay? She was hip to this like back when the Green Revolution, which, is a misnomer, it should have been the Death Revolution, when these corporations moved into India and started luring farmers into using chemicals to grow their food. She was hip to that, and she basically got on the campaign trail to get rid of these people, get them out of India, and get Roundup banned. And she's a very prominent activist. She's all over YouTube. If you look her up, Vandana Shiva, very intelligent woman. So the result of that was that farmers were lured into this chemical farming, and they wound up having a greatly reduced yield such that they got completely in debt. And there was this huge wave, basically an epidemic of suicides by farmers. I mean, tremendous numbers of Indian farmers killing themselves because they were so far in debt they would never get out, and their croplands were ruined, right? Their fortunes were gone, you know. So if you want to hear some more about Vandana Shiva and this whole issue, she is, it's Shiva. Shiva is her last name, and she's Indian. So, you know, so much for crop yield, better living through chemicals, right? So that's about all I have to say about the organic thing. Unfortunately, I hope that people are questioning Ronnie Smith at the UK Fruit Festival about that and giving him lots of pushback. You know, I admire him from starting the fruit festival, but if he's pulling that kind of punch, you know, he needs to find some more financial backing and get organic, you know, because really these statements and things that he's putting out about organic food are basically irresponsible. And I think in this video I have pretty well slapped that down pretty hard. And like I said, I have been 100% organic for 30 years. I know, you know, I know these effects to be real. I've experienced them myself. I've been my own scientist. And, you know, that's about all I have to say about that. Anyways, I hope I hope you got something out of this video. I will say in summary that everybody should get a fruititude. I'm using that term sort of lightly because I don't really agree with this nomenclature of being a fruitarian. Partly it's because of my upbringing, my socialization, because if you were a fruit, if somebody called you a fruit back when I was a kid, it did not have a complimentary meaning. And I've sort of always associated it with that negativity. And the other thing is I think it's very hard for conventional people to relate to that term fruitarian, okay? It just, you know, it just I think it reminds them of that negative connotation of being a fruit, right? It kind of separates them from the mainstream of society. It's like, oh, they're a fruitarian, you know, and how weird is that, right? I prefer to use the term tree-based or possibly fruit-based, you know. And like Doug Graham says, you know, everybody he's known that has tried to live on exclusively fruit, which is the implication of the word fruitarian, either winds up dead or they wind up losing their mind. And I have, you know, there are two specific cases, the only two people in my contacts throughout the years that ate nothing but fruit, adamantly, didn't touch anything else. One of them I haven't seen since the beginning of COVID. I used to see him around, but he's just like, he's pretty far out there, you know. I mean, you just look at him and you know something's seriously wrong. And the other one is homeless. You know, he's wandering around the Big Island somewhere, homeless, eating nothing but fruit. So, you know, originally I was under the impression that fruit did not have enough minerals in it to sustain you. And I think possibly that is the case, although since I acquired that point of view, I have learned that fruit does have minerals in it. But there's something about just eating fruit that just doesn't cut it. And I know you can go for periods of time on just fruit, and you might feel fantastic. Um, but over the long term, don't think it's a real good idea. Anyways, this is Trace Perot. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll try to get back in a week or so, although it's been more like 10 days. Been real busy. And this is my channel 20 at 70. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share it with people. If you're on Facebook, share it on Facebook. I enjoy doing the videos, and I enjoy knowing that I can help people avoid the 15 years of mistakes that I made, Basically, I'm handing you the silver platter with, the high energy, high health way on it. And when I started in the 90s, there just wasn't that much accurate information out there, so I had to struggle a lot, which actually was a good thing because, if you have to climb to the top of the mountain, you appreciate it when you get there, And so, it's one of the reasons why I'm totally raw, 100% organic, and will be for the rest of my life. And, that's my commitment. And I hope it will wind up being your commitment as well. Anyways, we'll see you next time.